this will be unavoidable. And the other argument happening everywhere, partly because so much of the money went to big industries, is surely this is the moment to rebuild not just a civil society of the kind that David has committed his life to, but also a civil economy. 100 years ago we had a very strong civil economy in this country. Building societies, co-ops, mutuals, microcredit, all of these things were part of the mainstream. And then in the 20th century, largely squeezed out by big business and big government. But if there's one lesson from the last year, it's you need pluralism in your economy if you're going to cope with big shocks and not be knocked back as we have been. And I think there are many lessons for us to learn from other parts of the world. We work, for example, with Mondragon in Spain, a cooperative group with 100,000 employees, which has doubled in size every 10 years, now operating in 50 countries. We work with new banks like Banca Prossima, a bank for social enterprise in Italy, created by one of their big banks in a way that I'm afraid none of the British big banks have done. Many other examples from Japan to America and so on, but in a way all trying to point to a very different kind of economy which could come out of the crisis. Now the sharp end of all of this, and the sharp end many of you and us are dealing with, is of course jobs. Earlier this week the Daily Mail said that the numbers of youth unemployed would hit the 1 million mark. I'm glad to say the Daily Mail was wrong, but unlike most Daily Mail things, they were only a little bit wrong in this case, and we almost did get to 1 million. We are facing an extraordinary crisis of joblessness, particularly for young people. Because we learned in the previous recessions, if you don't have a job to go to at 18, 20, 21, and you spend those years sort of drifting and waiting, it's very hard to find your way back. If you're not useful, you feel useless. You don't get the skills, you don't get the confidence. And we held an event this morning on happiness. And if there's one thing very clear from what's been learned on happiness, it's actually having a job is pretty important just to feeling happy in your life. All around us here, we have huge problems of worklessness even before this recession came along. If you're on IB, incapacity benefit for 2 years or more, you are more likely to die or retire than you are ever to get a job. And that's millions of people who in some ways are condemned never again to be part of society, to be useful. I think this should be a time of absolutely frenetic, feverish experiment and action around jobs, particularly for young people. We're currently working with some of the companies here in Canary Wharf on a project called Fast Laners, working with unemployed graduates, working together to help each other find and create jobs. We're working to create a new kind of school about 2 miles away in Newham, part of a network of schools better designed to prepare people for work. Developing apprenticeships, so Working Right is an organisation we're working with, giving one-to-one apprenticeships to work with a plumber or builder at 17 or 18 to learn those skills. Community Links involved in many projects of this kind. But I think all of us feel they're still in some ways much too small relative to the scale of the problem. And our fear is that things will get worse before they get better. And although as a society we have learned about ecological waste, how bad it is to have an economy which just throws things away, throws away energy, throws away packaging, we still don't really have a society which is as concerned about social waste and throwing away human beings, which is essentially what we're doing at the moment to several million people, throwing them away and saying that they don't matter. Now, the reason for hope, I think, is in a way the crisis. The economic crisis, which shot to shreds the credibility of many people on the higher floors of the buildings around here, almost coincided with the expenses crisis, which shot away the credibility of another elite of largely middle-aged men in Parliament. And in a way, that has created a space, I think, for others to fill, younger people perhaps to come in, who think they've got a better way of doing things. But my guess is that everyone in this room, and in the movement that Chain Reaction is part of, senses that although there are amazing projects and initiatives everywhere, there still isn't enough space opened up for the alternatives, not enough space for fixing the future. The barriers are still huge. We spend our lives banging our heads against brick walls. The good things get the crumbs from the side of the table, not really the full meal, and the old incumbents, whether it's in the economy or in politics, are still clinging on for all their worth to power. Anthony Gormley's plinth, which some of you will have seen back in the summer in Trafalgar Square, I think was in a way a symbol of where many people want our society to go. And his plinth, for those of you who didn't see it, thousands of people applied to have their little 1 hour standing on the plinth, doing whatever they wanted to do, instead of putting up a statue of an old admiral or general or politician. It was an incredibly democratic idea. Some of them were completely daft, some of them very funny, some of them very serious, and of course one of them was the guy who put his CV up trying to get a job. Why that was symbolic is I think we're in a time when people want to not just be observers, not just to be watchers. We want to be participants in politics, and we want to be participants in society, and we want to be participants in the economy. And everything I'm talking about, and everything I think here today, is about how do we get that engagement made real. A year ago we had a chain reaction of fear, which hopefully has now stabilised. But if we're going to get a chain reaction of hope, then that has to be driven by values. It has to be driven by a different vision of where we're headed, or where we could be in 5, 10 or 15 years' time. And at the heart of that vision, I think, has to be the idea we no longer are passive consumers, passive observers, passive citizens. And we're at one of these real turning points when it'd be very easy for people to drift back into fatalism, to think nothing can be done, nothing's possible, especially as public spending starts collapsing in the years ahead. And yet these, looking back in history, are the very moments when the future is most likely to be created. My very final comment is a very simple one, which I probably stole from David, I'm not sure, which is the definition of leadership. One of the definitions of leadership is the ability to use the smallest possible crisis for the biggest possible effect. And probably all of you do that within your own organisations. We are still in the midst of an enormous crisis, which needs not just a few leaders, but actually millions of leaders able to respond in that way and to be part of shaping the future rather than just reading about it in our newspapers. And I hope this event is part of animating and energising that movement which above all is about fixing the future. Thank you.